resume our journey to the second part of Silk Road. Remember, part 1 we stopped when he was talking about his experience at Lake Mansarovar. He was comparing his experience to that of others. In fact, his was way opposite. Now let's see what happens further on his journey. So let's see, the story goes on. It was dark by the time we finally left again, and after 10:30 p.m. we drew up outside a guest house in Darchan for what turned out to be another troubled night. The troubles never stopped. The challenges never stopped. But Nick, the protagonist, the hero of our chapter, the narrator, kept moving on and on. So yeah, after 10:30, they all stopped. We drew up, as in we stopped at a guest house in Darchan, and there was added trouble. What was the trouble? Kicking around in the open air rubbish dump that passed for the town of Hor had set off my cold once more. Now, because they were passing off, from the rubbish and there was dirt everywhere, now that had given him problem. It had triggered off his cold once more. He started getting that cold. Though if truth be told, it had never quite disappeared with my herbal tea. Even though I had taken that herbal tea, that cold had not relaxed. One of my nostrils, one of the sides of his nose was blocked again as I lay down to sleep. Now, as he tried to sleep, if one side of your nostril, one of your nostrils is blocked, it's very difficult for you to breathe. So he faced a similar problem. I wasn't convinced that the other would provide me with sufficient oxygen. Remember, he's on a very high altitude, right? He's somewhere high where anyways the oxygen level is low. So now, even then, breathing from one side, of the nose and not the other would not give him sufficient oxygen. He was feeling very disturbed. He couldn't sleep. My watch told me I was at 4,760 meters. It wasn't much higher than Ravu, and there I had been gasping. I had been, breathing through one's mouth due to pain or astonishment. You do this, that's gasping. For oxygen several times every night. I had grown accustomed to these nocturnal disturbances. Nocturnal as in the disturbances occurring at night by now, but they still scared me. He was somewhere used to it by now, but still at the end of it, he was yet scared. It was really actually bothering him. Tired and hungry, I started breathing through my mouth. Now, finally, he could not do that mouth thing any longer. The nose thing any longer. So what he did was, he started breathing through his mouth. After a while, I switched to single nostril power. Now, he did that for a little time, and then again he shut his mouth, and then he started breathing through that one nostril which was not blocked, which seemed to be admitting enough oxygen. There was enough oxygen, but just as I was drifting off, just as I was about to sleep, just as I was falling asleep, I woke up abruptly. I suddenly just woke up. Why? Something was wrong. He felt something is wrong. What was that? My chest felt strangely heavy and I sat up. He felt something heavy in the chest. A movement that cleared my nasal passages almost instantly and relieved the feeling in my chest. Now, the moment he got up with a jerk, he suddenly got up. Now, that movement, it cleared his nasal passage almost instantly, immediately, and relieved the feeling in my chest. That strange feeling, that heaviness he was having in the chest, it relieved him there. Curious, I thought. I was wondering, what was that? I lay back down and I tried again. Again, he lied down and he tried to sleep. The same result. Again, the same problem. I was on the point of disappearing into the land of Nod. Land of Nod as in the mythical land of sleep. That's where we call it once you sleep. So he was just about to sleep again when something told me not to. He tried to sleep again, but again he had the same issue. Again that nasal, again the chest heavy. So there was something that told him, his instinct maybe, his gut feeling that look, don't sleep, don't lie down, you sit up. Maybe that would give you ease. It must have been those emergency electrical impulses again. But this was not the same as on previous occasions. He said, I used to feel this again, like even previously I have felt it. But this time somewhere I felt it is different. It is very strange. It was different as to previous experiences. So what he did, this time I wasn't gasping for breath. I wasn't, breathing heavy. I was simply not allowed to go to sleep. I was simply feeling that, look, I should not lie down. I should not sleep. That's all I felt. He didn't have any breathing issues right now. Sitting up once more immediately made me feel better. Again, he got up and he, sat down. He did not sleep. Then he started feeling better. I could breathe freely and my chest felt fine. So far, it was sorted. But as soon as I lay down, my sinuses filled and my chest was odd. Now here his sinus also got triggered. Obviously, it was very cold out there, so it had to happen. And his chest was odd. He had some odd feeling in the chest. I tried propping myself, to support in an upright position or to stop from falling. He tried holding himself up. Upright against the wall. He tried sitting against the wall, but now I couldn't manage to relax enough to drop off. He sat up there, but he was not in that relaxed position where he could fall asleep. He just managed to sit. He was feeling better. I couldn't put my finger on the reason. I could not understand what was the problem, but I was afraid to go to sleep. He said, again, if I lie down, again I will have an issue. I don't want to do that. A little voice inside me, it's the instinct, was saying that if I did, I might never wake up again. So I stayed awake all night. He's saying he had that gut feeling coming from inside. You have your inner voice. Your conscious tells you. Quite often when you're doing something which you're not supposed to do, your conscious tells you that I think this is wrong, you should not do. But because you really want to do it, no matter what, you overpower that voice. You see, quite often when you are giving your exams, generally in the MCQ where you are confused, the very first answer that strikes your mind is the word, it's the voice of your instinct. But then what happens? No, I guess it must be D, it's not B. And then later when you discuss it with your friends, you realize A, B was the answer. Your gut feeling most of the times, rather always, gives you the right answer. So please keep following your gut feeling, your inner voice. Yes, so he stayed up all night. Sitan took me to the Darchan Medical College the following morning. Obviously, he needed some medical treatment. So, Sitan took him to the Darchan Medical College. The medical college at Darchan was new and it looked like a monastery. This is how a monastery looks. Monastery is a building occupied by a community of monks living under religious vows. So, the monks they generally stay in such monasteries. So this building, this college, medical college at Darchan was new and it looked like a monastery from the outside with a very solid door that led into a large courtyard. Now that door actually took them to an unroofed area that is completely or partially enclosed by walls or buildings. They entered the medical college. We found the consulting room which was dark and cold and occupied by a Tibetan doctor who wore none of the paraphernalia that I had been expecting. Now he said we went there, there was this Tibetan doctor who was there. He was sitting there and he was not into any of the accessories. What do you mean by paraphernalia? It is the equipment needed for a particular activity. So obviously, if he was a doctor, you have to have the white coat, you have your stethoscope, and as in properly dressed like a doctor. He did not have anything of the sort on him. No white coat. He looked like any other Tibetan with a thick pullover and a woolly hat. A pullover, we have a knitted overhead garment covering the top half of the body, just like your sweaters, yeah? So he had that and a woolly hat because it was cold. When I explained my sleepless symptoms and my sudden aversion to lying down, he said, I explained to him what problems am I facing. The sleepless symptoms, I'm not able to sleep. Why? Because of the sudden aversion. Aversion as in the strong dislike. Literally, he said, I don't feel like lying down. I'm getting scared of it now. I just don't like it. He shot me a few questions while feeling the veins in my wrist. You know, these people, they check your veins on the wrist. They do it like this, right? They get to know from there. So he said, he asked him a few questions and he said, nothing, it's a cold. He said, finally, through Sitan. Through Sitan as in why? Through Sitan because he was a Tibetan person. He was unable to converse in English. Sitan was that one person who understood both. He was like a translator. So that is why he said, finally, through Sitan. Sitan translated it to me. A cold and the effect of altitude. It is a cold and obviously the effects of the height. Height in relation to sea or ground level. They were at a very high altitude. I'll give you something for it. He told him, don't worry, I'll give you something for it. I asked him if he thought I'd recover enough to be able to do the Kora. He said, he found out from him that, look, will I be enough, well enough to actually complete the Kora, to actually complete that circle, the round thing which I am here for? Oh yes, he said, you'll be fine. He says, don't worry, you can do what you have come here for. You'll be absolutely okay. I walked out of the medical college clutching a brown envelope, clutching as in grasping tightly. I was holding a brown envelope stuffed with 15 screws of paper. 15 screws of paper as in tiny bits, but then he had some kind of herb, some kind of medicine he was given, 15 of them. I had a 5-day course of Tibetan medicine, which I started right away. A 5-day course. So, remember he had the 15 papers, like, those full of medicines. He had to have it probably thrice a day. So it was a 5-day course. He had to take that medicine. He started immediately. I opened an after breakfast package and found it contained a brown powder that I had to take with hot water. It tasted just like cinnamon. They give herbs. They don't give the allopathy medicines. They give you herbs. So he says it, tasted something like cinnamon, dalchini. Yes, it tasted like that brown powder. And he had to consume, he had to take it with hot water. The contents of the lunchtime and bedtime packages were less obviously identifiable. They were something similar. Both contained small spherical brown pellets. They had something like those brown medicines, something different it was, which really he couldn't actually guess what it was. The powder he could guess was something like cinnamon, but this was something different. Both contained small spherical as in round brown pellets. They looked suspiciously like sheep dung. But of course, I took them. It resembled something like sheep dung, but then okay, I took it. That night, after my full day's course, after the first full day's course, I slept soundly. I had very good sleep. Like a log, not a dead man. I slept like a log, but definitely not a dead man. I was fit enough to sleep well. Once he saw that I was going to live, Sitan left me. Now, here at this point of time, even Sitan left the narrator. He left the protagonist. He told him, now you're fine enough. Now you're absolutely okay. So I need to go. To return to Lhasa. He had to return. That was his destination. So Daniel also left. Now Sitan is also leaving. As a Buddhist, he told me, he knew that it didn't really matter if I passed away. But he thought it would be bad for business. Now, Sitan was worried. He said, look, he was telling, as a Buddhist, obviously, he's telling the protagonist, he said, see, even if you would have died, even if you would have passed away, it was okay for me. You're passing away in a holy place. That's fine. But the problem was my business would be affected. Now, he used to deal, that was his business, taking people around. So, if people would come to know, my business would be affected. So, he just shares that with him. They had that compatibility. They had become good friends. They could speak that much. Quite often, when you go going about anywhere, you go to any city, any hill station, and you have those guides with you, you tend to become pretty friendly with them. So this is how it was with him, with Sitan. Darchan didn't look so horrible after a good night's sleep. Now, after he had slept very well, he realized Darchan was not that very bad. It was still dusty, partially derelict and punctuated by heaps of rubble and refuse. Now he says it was dusty, there was dust everywhere. Partially derelict. Derelict means it was in a very poor condition as a result of misuse, as in it was neglected sort of thing. So it was everywhere, and it was punctuated as in at small places, like we talk of punctuation types. So it was punctuated by heaps of rubble and refuse. See, these words are very nice to use. So keep them in mind. You already have the meanings right in front of you. So keep using them as well. But the sun shone brilliantly in a clear blue sky, and the outlook as in the person's point of view, across the plain to the south gave me a vision of the Himalayas, commanded by a huge snow-capped mountain, Gurla Mandata, with just a wisp of cloud suspended over its summit. Now, as he got there, as he started back in the morning, the sun shone brilliantly, yes. The outlook, as in what he could see from there where he was standing, across the plain to the south, he got a vision of the Himalayas. Finally, he could see the Himalayas commanded by a huge snow-capped mountain. That mountain which he saw, the snow-capped mountain, Gurla Mandata, with just a wisp of cloud. There was a little cloud, just passing over the peak of the mountain. That was the view, that was the finest view he came across. The town had a couple of rudimentary general stores selling Chinese cigarettes, soap, and other basic provisions, as well as the usual strings of prayer flags. Now, he had a couple of rudimentary, as in underdeveloped, the basic general stores. What were they selling? They were selling Chinese cigarettes, they were selling soap and other basic provisions, the daily necessities, as well as the usual string of prayer flags. You remember we discussed prayer flags, talking of peace, wisdom, strength, those prayer flags. In front of one, men gathered in the afternoon for a game of pool. Now, they needed some entertainment, something they had to do. So, in front of one of them, there were men who gathered in the afternoon for a game of pool. The battered table, the table was in a very bad condition, looking supremely incongruous as in not in harmony. It was not a well set table in the open air, while the nearby women washed their long hair in the icy water of a narrow brook as a small stream that babbled down past my guest house. Babble down as in it made continuous flowing sound. You have that stream flowing sound, beautiful sound it comes. It's actually music to the ears if you really listen, if you actually listen to it with concentration. That, water thing, even when the raindrops fall on the roof of your house, you can hear that. It's nice, it's music. Sometimes concentrate on these, sounds of the nature. Yeah, so that was that was the scene he got to see. The men were playing and the women were washing their hair using that water of the stream. Darchan felt relaxed and unhurried. It was fine, everything was moving slow at a leisure, but for me, it came with a significant drawback. For him, it was a problem. What was the problem? There were no pilgrims. Generally, that place is a place of pilgrimage, right? Many people come, many tourists come. Now, right now, at the point of time when he was there were no pilgrims. The people, who journey to a sacred place for religious reasons, he was the only one. He could not find any other pilgrims over there. I had been told that at the height of the pilgrimage season, now he was aware that the height of the pilgrimage season, the town was bustling with visitors. There's a particular season, when you go, like I think even when we go to Vaishno Devi, most of us, we go during, November, December, it's Jan and Feb is peak time. So around Diwali, you find the maximum people visiting such places, right? So he had felt the same. He had been told that the height, the main point where actually there are maximum visitors, there'll be a whole lot of people during that time. Many brought their own accommodation. Now, some would come there carrying their own tents. They would not stay in guest houses. They would carry their own tents. enlarging the settlement round its edges as they set up their tents, which spilled down onto the plain. They, used to put up their tents and it would come down to the plain. I had timed my arrival for the beginning of the season, but it seemed I was too early. What I thought before the season, actually just at the beginning, the season just began and I, planned my trip accordingly. But then I felt it was too early. People had not even started coming in and I was already there, so I could hardly find any visitors. One afternoon, I sat pondering my options over a glass of tea in Darchan's only cafe. Now, he was actually thinking about something carefully. He sat there with a cup of tea, with a glass of tea in Darchan's only cafe, and he was just wondering what next. After a little consideration, I concluded they were severely limited. He did not have any such options available to him. Clearly, I hadn't made much progress with my self-help program on positive thinking. I was not very clearly defined, though I was, he was staying positive all the time. He was pretty positive about the fact that don't worry, I will get there. He had those positive affirmations. He was sure that, okay, I'm definitely getting there, but somewhere he lacked it. Somewhere there was an issue. So, in my defense, it hadn't been easy with all my sleeping difficulties, but however, I looked at it, I could only wait. Now, he did have these issues that he had come up, but they weren't easy. But then all that he knew was he had no choice, but he had to wait. The pilgrimage trail was well trodden, but I didn't fancy doing it alone. It was well trodden as in it was frequented by travelers. There were people coming and going, but he did not want to go there alone. He wanted to make sure that there is company with him. He wanted to join somebody. The Kora was seasonal because parts of the route were liable to blockage by snow. Now, it was seasonal. Kora was a very seasonal, thing because parts of the route, there were certain parts, on the route which would be liable as in they are likely to experience blockage by snow. So that route was not very simple. It's definitely not very easy to get there. You have to face these obstacles. So he was sure that he would have to face this. That's the reason he did not want to go alone. I had no idea whether or not the snow had cleared, but I wasn't encouraged by the chunks of dirty ice. There were chunks of dirty ice that still clung to the banks of Darchan's brook. That stream which was going, there was dirty ice. Looking at all that and then, thinking of that, it did not give me any kind of motivation, any kind of encouragement that I should go there alone by myself. Since Sitan had left, I hadn't come across anyone in Darchan with enough English to answer even this most basic question. He said Sitan was a big help. He was like a translator. After Sitan had left, he did not come across anyone who could converse with him in English. If he had to ask even one basic question, there was nobody to answer him because nobody understood English. They did not speak in English. Until that is, I met Norbu. The cafe was small, dark, and cavernous. Cavernous as in it was like a cavern, giving impression of vast, dark depths. So it was like a cavern with a long metal stove that ran down the middle. That was how the cafe was. The walls and the ceiling were wreathed in sheets of multicolored plastic. Wreathed as in they were surrounded by something. You have the wreath we wear. This is wreathed. It was surrounded by something. It was surrounded by sheets of multicolored plastic of the striped variety. It had stripes on it, broad blue, red and white. That is made into stout. Stout as in of a fat or heavy built, voluminous shopping bags sold all over China and in many other countries of Asia as well as Europe. Now he was coming across all these. They were, they had the stripes of the blue, red and white. They were nice and thick stripes. They were also on the bags which were sold all over China, even in other countries of Asia as well as Europe. As such, plastic must rate as one of China's most successful exports along the Silk Road today. He said plastic has been one of the most successful exports of China, and they use the same Silk Road, the Silk Route they use to, export it. The cafe had a single window beside which I had taken up my position so that I could see the pages of my notebook. Now he had that single window. He used to go and sit over there because, there was light coming, so he could read his notebook. I had also brought a novel with me to help pass the time. Thank God he had something to do because he had no one to talk to. He was alone, and so he had a novel, he had carried his notebook. Norbu saw my book when he came in and asked with a gesture as in he movement of body, to express an idea. So he says if he could sit opposite me. So he asked me, he said, please, can I sit here? That was the gesture he did at my rickety table. Rickety as in poorly made, and it's likely to break. Anytime it would have broken. You English? He inquired. He asked me, you English? After he had ordered tea, I told him I was, and we struck up a conversation. Finally, he found someone whom he could talk to because they both had the common mode of communication, English. I didn't think he was from those parts because he was wearing a wind cheater and metal-rimmed spectacles of a Western style. He was wondering where he was from. He was Tibetan. He told me, but he worked in Beijing at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in the Institute of Ethnic Literature. I assumed he was on some sort of field work. He was Tibetan, but actually he was working in Beijing, and he was working at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in the Institute of Ethnic Literature. So he thought maybe he has come from there, so probably he's come for some field work. Yes and no, he said. He says, maybe yes and a no. How is that? I have come to do the Kora. Oh, that was lottery. That was literally a lottery for the protagonist, for our narrator. My heart jumped. Why? Because now he had company. The company he was waiting for, he was looking for. Norbu had been writing academic papers about the Kailash Kora and its importance in various works of Buddhist literature for many years, he told me, but he had never actually done it himself. Now this person, Norbu, had been writing all about it, all about the Kailash Kora, circling the Kailash. He had heard about it, but he had never actually done it himself. He had not experienced it. So now he was there to experience it. When the time came for me to tell him what brought me to Dachin, his eyes lit up. Now, I also had to tell him that, okay, I am here for the same reason. And so even he was extremely happy. His eyes lit up. We could be a team, he said excitedly. He said, wow, we could go together. Two academics who have escaped from the library. Both of them actually, coming from it was like he was comparing the two academics coming from the library. Both of them coming from the academic background. Perhaps my positive thinking strategy was working after all. You remember, the narrator was sitting with that positive thinking thought. He says, finally, I think that strategy is working. I had positive thinking, what you think actually, what you speak, what goes around comes back. So he was sending all positive vibes in the universe. It went round the space and it brought Norbu to him. So positive thinking 100% works. You should try it. If you haven't, stick to it always. So yes, my initial relief at meeting Norbu, who was also staying in the guest house, was tempered by the realization that he was almost as ill-equipped as I was for the pilgrimage. Bad luck. Both of them were not very well equipped. They were not having the necessary resources. They were not fully prepared. He realized that he was there at Dachin, at the cafe, the guest house that he was staying, but it was tempered, it was counterbalanced with the fact that both of us were not carrying the right things we should be carrying for the pilgrimage. He kept telling me how fat he was and how hard it was going to be. He said, look, I'm really fat and it's really going to be very difficult for me to climb up. Very high up, he kept reminding me, so tiresome to walk. He's saying it's going to be so difficult for me to walk up because he was a little on the stouter side. He wasn't really a practicing Buddhist. He was not practicing Buddhism. He was not actually that part. It transpired, but he had enthusiasm and he was, of course, Tibetan. Now, it transpired as in it was revealed, it showed, but he did have the enthusiasm. He was a Tibetan, so he definitely had that spirit in him. Although I had originally envisaged making the trek in the company of devout believers, he had originally envisaged, as in he had contemplated, he had actually thought of it, making trek in the company. He thought, when I do the trek, I will do it in the company of devout, as in showing deep religious feeling. I will be walking with those strong believers. On reflection, I decided that perhaps Norbu would turn out to be the ideal companion. He said, when I thought over it, I felt Norbu is the best person to go with. He suggested we hire some yaks to carry our luggage. We need to, you have these yaks over there as the mode of transport. So he said we will, hire some to carry our luggage, which I interpreted as a good sign. I understood. I said, yes, that sounds good. It makes sense. And he had no intention of prostrating himself. Prostrating as in throwing oneself to ground. He did not want to tire himself all round the mountain. He said, I definitely don't want to fall flat on that ground. So yes, we will take these yaks. Not possible, he cried, collapsing across the table in hysterical laughter. He said it's not possible. He literally said it out and he collapsed across the table in hysterical laughter. Hysterical as in with uncontrollable laughter. He literally laughed out loud. It wasn't his style, and anyway, his tummy was too big. He says now that wasn't his style. It definitely was, and obviously he kept telling that his tummy is really big. He's really fat. Well, this is what brings us to a finally good note of this lesson. It actually concludes on this very good note, on this hysterical laughter of Norbu, and it tells us what? What is it actually trying to tell you? The purpose of life, after all, is to live it, to taste experience to the utmost, to reach out eagerly and without fear for newer and richer experience. You should experience always. Don't get scared of anything. Go for that nice, rich experience. Go without fear, just like our protagonist. However, going through all the obstacles also, he made it to the Kora. Both of them had the goals complete by giving each other company, and they made it to the top. Just like you and I are going to make it to the top. For the same, keep watching and keep learning.